local communities living well in the world of crises. And what we want to do tonight is we have 4 speakers that are going to talk a little bit about kind of the research they do and the way they look at how local communities try to not just survive through all the environmental and social crises we have, but to thrive and to also work to make things better. So there's a little bit of a theme that's going to go on. And we have these 4 speakers who speak for about 15 minutes, and they will have time to open it up to have some discussion and sort of share ideas that come up from the discussions and also your own ideas that you bring to it. So, the way I want to kind of start this off is with a land acknowledgement, which of course is something that hopefully you're all familiar with when when you come to talks and things like that, or classes. And as most people are probably aware, we're in the homeland of the Abenaki people, right? Including the Sokoki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. So we've been taking care of the landscape around here for over 12,000 years. And just to give you an idea of what this area is, right? You can see this part of New England here, and Cape Cod down there, and then we're over here, right, in this area. And the reason I bring this up is one, to honor the people that have been in this area that have stewarded it. But there's also other reasons we should be thinking about recognizing these groups in different places where we may be, including here. And first, one of the reasons that we do Indigenous land acknowledgements is that it's to remind us that the so-called normal governance that we have in a place like this, that we currently experience, is the product of a violent occupation, right? There was a change in governance. And it continues to displace other people and also other ways of caring for the places that we're in. And so when we acknowledge that there have been other ways of taking care of these places, it serves as a powerful reminder that people have managed these places where we live in sustainable and just ways. Right? And what we may today perceive as the normal way of doing things over the long arc of history may not really be normal at all. Right? And hopefully also gives hope that we can change what we do. Right? And so one of the quotes that I was thinking about as we were kind of putting together this talk is from an Indigenous scholar, Noelani Goodyear Kapua, who's Kanaka Maoli from Hawaii. And she says, how can Indigenous and settler peoples work together to unmake relations of settler colonialism and instead imagine and move urgently towards a decolonial future, right, for everybody? And I think one of the key messages in her work that I think kind of infuses a lot of what we're going to kind of talk about today is that this question is not just critical within struggles in Indigenous communities, but really everywhere, right? Because as most folks know, we've got a lot of crises going on, right? Social and environmental. And the idea that I think we're going to try and talk about here today from different angles is, can we do more than merely survive our current environmental and social crises, right? Can we reactivate different, more sustainable ways of running our communities and our world? And I emphasize this word reactivate, right? Because it's not like we have to come up with this from scratch, right? People have been living in these areas in sustainable ways and socially just ways. And so hopefully that's kind of a way of sort of framing some of the things that we'll get into here a little bit. Without further ado, what I want to do is start, having have us jump right into some of the speakers here. Karen Heikkila is going to be our first this person to discuss. She's a visiting postdoctoral fellow from Helsinki, and who works in the Aron Asli archives in the library right across the way here, and she's going to talk about some of her work in Malaysia. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Those of you here who are in my class, you've seen this before, make sure you sign in so I know you all came. So if you're not in my class, that's okay, just pass it along, all right? But without further ado, Karen, come on up. I will switch this over.
So, hi everyone. Good evening to all of you. It's so nice to see so many of you in attendance. So I should first of all start by saying how very honored I am to be at Keene State College to work with the Robert Denton collection at the RNSC archive, which, as Sasha just mentioned, is located at Mason Library. And so very quickly, the collection comprises field notes, photographs, and other documents on the Skye people, who are one of the Indigenous groups living, who are one of 18 Indigenous groups living in Peninsular Malaysia. So, as you can see from the map, Malaysia is in Southeast Asia, and the peninsular portion of Malaysia is attached to mainland Southeast Asia, while the rest of Malaysia is located on the island of Borneo, separated from the peninsula by the South China Sea. And the Skye homeland is roughly in the middle of the peninsula. It's a hilly area covered by rainforest. I'd like to also acknowledge the hard work that went into securing a Wenegren Foundation grant to establish the RNSC archive at KSC. And it was really due to two people, two longtime RNSC scholars, who got together and wrote up the grant application and managed to get quite a big sum of money to put together the archive here. So they are Professor Rosemary Jano, who is supposed to be here today, is here, I'm not sure. Yes, she is, she's right at the back. And also Professor Adela Bayer, who sadly passed away this summer. So it's thanks to their efforts that we have a physical repository outside of Malaysia that is dedicated to preserving primary as well as secondary research materials related to the RNSC. So the idea for our panel presentation today was actually sparked by an insightful and hopeful, if you like, series of articles that was published this year in the journal Environment and Planning E. Geographies of Hope was the central theme of the series, and I would like to spend a few minutes now to go over what is meant by Geographies of Hope. So the term was first coined by an American environmentalist called Wallace Stegner, who said that in order to retain our sanity as creatures, human societies need a geography of hope, which refers to the importance of experiencing nature on a personal level to lead more balanced and fulfilling lives. So in later decades, and in particular this year, with the publication of EPE, of this EPE special issue, the idea of geographies of hope has been used by scholars to examine and reflect on instances of hope at the local community level. And as many of the articles in the series point out, hope is not wishful thinking. It's not lodged in some sort of ambiguous future. It's not only focused on overcoming crises. And it's not about escapism. Rather, it's about locating the glimmers of possibility in the present, even when the odds are stacked against one. Hope is an ontological need, as Paulo Freire said. So without hope, we miss out on a fundamental part of being human. I will start off our panel by speaking about Skye communities living in a forest reserve in Peninsular Malaysia. I began working with the Skye a little over a decade ago, and will speak from my own field observations, as well as bring in Robert Denton's ideas. Denton was the first long-term anthropologist to study Skye communities, and he was a meticulous collector of all sorts of information pertaining to Skye life. He made excellent use of his time in the field to photograph and document the Skye cultural lifeway, and his analyses of Skye thinking and nonviolent behavior are really unsurpassed in detail and clarity. So the Skye are traditionally shifting cultivators, which means that they have utilized the slash and burn method of agriculture to grow crops like hill rice, tapioca, millet, and corn. They also engage in hunting, trapping, and foraging, and still speak their own mother tongue language, which is also known as Skye. They are fluent in Malaysia's national language, Bahasa Malaysia, and some young people maybe about your age, would be able to converse in English to a degree. Samay and other Orang-Asli groups make up less than 1% of the total Malaysian population, so they're a very small group. And for a living, many grow fruit trees in the forest and harvest the fruit to sell. And since money replaced barter in their communities, they've gradually increased cash crop agriculture and largely decreased food agriculture, which means that nowadays they purchase rice and other food products. People also do wage work, for instance, working in stores or in town, in stores in town, or as laborers on commercial farms. And the challenges to Samay communities are basically rooted in not having legal title to their ancestral lands. So without title, Samay have not been able to protect their territories from extractivism. Their forests have been felled for timber, dams have been built on their rivers, vegetable gardens, palm oil plantations, and even aquaculture projects have been established on their lands, and the list goes on. So because there's no legal protection of their ancestral lands, the government on a whim can evict them from their territories and also leave them without residential or economic alternatives. So Samay live under immense stress with the threat of being homeless and without the means to make a living always on their minds. But they have been driven off their lands and persecuted at other times too. They were periodically enslaved, right up to the late 1800s. In fact, their quiet and cautious personalities may stem from the generational trauma of the slave raids that still haunts them in the present and that continues to shape, in particular, their dealings with the non-Indigenous world. So given these historic and contemporary uncertainties, why have the Samay not become another Malaysian mainstream ethnic group? That would have been possible to achieve by converting to Islam, adopting Malay Muslim customs, and becoming peasants in government rubber and oil palm plantations. But in the forest world of their ancestral territories, Samay experienced safety and freedom. Their ancestral lands are territories of hope and life. While there are a multitude of struggles that Samay have to contend with in dealing with the outside world, their territories offer respite from these pressures. The forest is a refuge and a space where they can continue living as Indigenous Samay people. This is where it's important to talk about their egalitarian social organization. So their society has been traditionally anarchist, which means that as a group of people, they've been able to manage their community affairs without an authority figure as such. So in the past, when conflict arose, people didn't attack one another. Rather, they broke off from the group and set up residence elsewhere. Or if the conflict was minor, they would talk things out till a solution could be found. Today, Samay still talk out their differences, even though the government has imposed a leadership structure in their villages. Every village these days has an appointed village head, for instance. Nonetheless, nobody is ever, forced or cajoled into respecting the office of the headman. One is free to speak one's mind, disagree, and even walk away from a village town hall, as long as the disagreeing parties eventually come to a peaceful compromise. And there's still a connection with nature from the kinds of agroecological cultivation that Samay engage in. So people plant in the forest, and what they're planting are endemic local tree species. I would say that apart from pre-Columbian crops like tapioca, corn, and tomatoes, introduced, perhaps some 500 years ago to the peninsula, and of course, hevea rubber from Brazil and palm oil from Africa, all crops that Samay plant are indigenous. Their cultivation techniques too are non-invasive and organic in nature. So intercropping is carried out agrochemicals are not used, and the only tools used for agricultural work would be things like dibbles, hoes, adzes, and machetes. So traditional tools are also used during hunting, trapping, and fishing, and these are just a few examples of how entrenched and well-versed Semai are in their ancestral knowledge systems. So the Semai connection to the forest is also one of reverence for two reasons. Firstly, it is the basis of Semai spirituality, and secondly, it's a storied landscape with the names of hills, streams, and other geographical features, holding origin stories and historical narratives. And I will focus on Semai spirituality for the rest of my talk because this has much to do with what living well and living with hope means to Semai. So I'll quickly say that hope is a central part of the Semai worldview in the sense that they are also an immediate return society. And what that means is, in a nutshell, they live a hand-to-mouth existence. But without the negative connotations it carries as an English idiomatic expression. It's a way of maintaining personal as well as group autonomy. And there's little, for instance, there's little accumulation and also little, not very much savings for a rainy day. Rather, the focus is on living in the present, having a carefree life, and on having just enough for today. And this leads to how natural resources are harvested in the forest. The small-scale and sustainable character of Semai agriculture, hunting and foraging, follow the principles of taking only what you need and always sharing what you bring back from the forest with your neighbors. The Semai concept of living well is known as Chat Sama, which literally means eating together. And it's the idea that everyone has something to eat and nobody is ever excluded. Even in the present, where certain villages make more money and have such luxury items as a smartphone or a car, everyone is still equal because of the obligation to share forest resources. So this means that while there are richer and poorer people in Semai villages, nobody is ever destitute. And Semai see as much. They point out that there are no Semai beggars in their villages or in the towns and cities nearby. And the Semai sharing ethic and taboo system, are really a group accountability system. People are not only responsible for their individual selves or their families, but others who make up their world. So there's a sense that because humans and non-humans alike carry a soul, they must be respected and never treated as though they were hopeless and discardable. And we see this in how orphaned and physically impaired persons are cherished and provided for in Semai villages. And as poor as some Semai families are, they have even adopted non-Indigenous orphaned children who are then raised in the village and who grow up as Semai. And the same goes for animals and plants. There isn't very much animal domestication among Semai, but animals and plants are regularly adopted and cared for. Wild animals are brought home, fed, loved, and then set free in the forest after some time. So going back to Semai spirituality, it is a belief system in which the realities of human life are viewed through the lens of the forest. Good and evil are concretized in the beauty of nature and natural hazards that can claim human lives. There is an unshakable trust that the good in everything always prevails, even if much suffering has to be borne in the interim. So Semai spirituality is very pragmatic. It is a hopeful way of living on a day-to-day basis, rather than a set of self-soothing beliefs. The idea of a god or higher power is present in Semai spirituality. So some people would think of God as creator, while others believe in a metaphysical reality that transcends human existence. And generally the word Jinang, or grandfather or ancestor, is used for God. Many Semai have embraced world religions such as Baha'ism or Christianity. Nonetheless, the animist belief system still plays a role in their worldview, particularly if they live in or close to the forest. And I should also point out that prayer is a fundamental part of life. So for instance, when calamities are reported on the news, or people get sick in the village, people gather together to pray. And they pray at each other's homes or go to ancestral grave sites where they plead with the benevolent spirits of their dead kindred for help. And perhaps the earliest form of prayer in Semai life was made by shamans to cure various illnesses that plagued members of the community. And people also make time to be just quiet. So for instance, when walking in the forest, and they also have set times for doing things. For instance, working during the day and storytelling and making music in the evenings. So order to the day is important, for it ensures purpose and direction in life. And this is part of being hopeful because it's tied to the community and being in the present moment. And now, for some closing remarks, I'd like to share an analogy for how Semai live life. So living life is like traveling in the forest. One treads carefully in the forest, always mindful of not giving offense to spirits. If one gets lost, one stops and prays in one's heart for guidance. You don't panic and lose hope, because if you do, you become even more confused and lost. Instead, what you might do is cut a palm frond, strip off the leaves, and weave a wayfinding aid called tipai or chekrigrot. You can also use banana leaves for this purpose. And it's said to be a puzzle to trick the spirits that led you astray. So one is able to stay calm by focusing on the puzzle. It's an aid that helps you unravel in your mind the twists and turns of the route you took. And eventually you figure out your way, through the maze of forest trails, and you find your way home. So I'd like to make one more point, if I may. So just to sum up everything, for Semai, a connection to nature, work that is meaningful and tied to the fruits of your labor, relationships, kin networks and friendships, and an acceptance of and a willingness to see that empirical reality flows from a greater metaphysical or spiritual reality, are some essentials to living a good life. So this is not to downplay that living conditions must be improved for their communities and opportunities created for them to be properly recognized as stewards of the forest rather than poachers. However, hope and resilience are present in the proactive decisions they make on a daily basis. A prime example is how they continue to plant their way to the future. So Semai tree planting is not only a way of affirming ownership of their territories, but a way of guaranteeing their descendants a living. And in doing so, they actually conserve the structure of the forest. And they also play a part in conserving foodscapes, which is really a more sustainable strategy than only maintaining seed banks here and there in the world. So there are some very important positive spin-offs from their forest-dependent lifestyle. Yet they are not recognized by the government for this reforestation and regenerative work. All the same, the forest is their inheritance, and in the end, that is a very hopeful thing for all of us. Thank you, and I'll pass this on to our next speaker, Henry.
Yeah, I need a button. That's what I need. What button do I push?
Just this one.
All right. Thank you. All right. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, you doing good? Y'all looking good up here. Yeah. All right. So, my name's Henry. I'm like a social justice organizer. I'm a carpenter for a living. I used to help shut down cities in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to stop neoliberal trade. Y'all know what neoliberalism is, right? Thank you. And I've been a member of the National Lawyers Guild because we had to figure out how to hustle people's way back out of jail without getting too many charges for like 20 some odd years. I really have been involved in direct action movements, using our bodies to get in the way of the extraction of global capital for a long while. I'm starting to realize that might be an attempt at a shortcut. And what needs to come along with stopping the bad guys and acting punk rock in the streets is really trying to build people power with folks like y'all. So Sasha was both kindly and foolish enough to invite me to come spend time with all of y'all. And I'm psyched about that. So I'm a member of rural Vermont. Does anybody know what rural Vermont is? That's amazing. I don't know why y'all know what that is, but that's amazing. So rural Vermont's the Vermont organization that is in turn a member of National Family Farm Coalition, which is in turn a member of La Via Campesina. And that's why that's important, because La Via Campesina is a several 100 million peasant strong organization on 6 continents. Not only are they between 300 and 800 million people, right, between the population of the United States and about 3 times, but they're anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, pro-feminist, pro-indigenous, and so on. By far the largest organization in the world, probably speaking some language like y'all might resonate with, like anti-imperialism, right? Who knows who Henry Kissinger was? Right? Can I get these for Henry Kissinger? Thank you. Well, yeah, we're going to go out to a Henry Kissinger party after this. So who's students? Who's got a job? Right on. Who are y'all here because you're more interested, or you're more here because you're looking for pathways to survival? Raise your hand if you're interested. Raise your hand if you're looking for pathways to survival. You can do both. Right? No, right? Okay, so the overview of I'm just here to remind us to be asking these questions. What if we need a huge effort to reorganize ourselves to deal with a totally busted economy, a totally busted ecology? What if the climate crisis is, in fact, powerful enough to be the great uniter, right? To help, to be this ridiculous conglomerator because everybody's got standing in the situation, right? And that not only gives us the same context, but a mandate to trust each other, right? What if we had to trust each other, because what the hell else are we going to do, right? It's a hell of a thing to say. So yeah, what if agrarian movements and economics are not only very applicable to Vermont as a way to manifest such a movement, but what if we thought that regenerative agriculture, including agroforestry, was one of the most effective things for working class populations to reverse global climate change, and therefore some brands of genocide and some brands of serious social injustice and incarceration and things like that? What if doing good agriculture, farming, not industrial farming, but we get to hold the center and be farmers the way we think of farming, and what if that was the route to all of these lofty social justice ideas that somebody might be paying this institution some money to find out about? Maybe that's the case. All right. So so the basic premise, right, is that we are, too many buttons. It's possible that we could use tools from like the civil rights movement and the populist movement to build a social movement, to be the delivery vehicle of the practices that we think that we need to be employed, right? Because if we're all hanging out, learning about really important stuff, like everything from social justice, thought and philosophy to permaculture design or anything like that, and then we're like sending articles around on Facebook about that, right? That's what the man wants us to do. They want us to talk to each other on Facebook and not be in the streets and not be in the economy and not actually applying the things that whatever you think needs to happen, I would wager more of it needs to happen than is happening, right? With more people involved. Who's with the just transition? Who knows about the just transition? Not with it, but who? All right, the just transition. It's a new mode of philosophy. It's being promoted in the Western Hemisphere by like the Climate Justice Alliance, the Indigenous Environmental Network, huge alliance bodies, some of the largest, like Grassroots Global Justice, right? Some of the biggest alliances of frontline communities in the United States, Canada, Mexico, all over South America. And what's actually really cool is that Karen was talking about the Semai, and they are fighting against extractivism. And the whole point of, that doesn't seem square on the screen. Anyway, is turning the extractive economy into a regenerative economy, right? And trying to get out of militarism and into caring and sacredness, into deep democracy. This Semai were also talking about meaningful work, right? They were also talking about living well. Buen vivir, which is translated from the Andean, right? The northern South American good life, right? For some reason it's translated in the English presentation of this stuff, they call it buen vivir instead of good living or living well. But when it's really started out as sumak kausai, which is Quechua for living well, right? So this group of indigenous people from the Andean highlands who are helping found this philosophy for all of us are on a lot of the same page as the Semai that Karen told us about. That was really awesome and heartening, Karen. Thank you so much for that. So anyway, this is a nice piece of philosophy. Movement Generation has some really outstanding content about just transition. I invite you guys to come check it out. Another thing, just to point out now, I'm just going to go over some stuff. I don't expect y'all, this is like a bunch of ads, right? This is just having a little dialogue. This is some stuff that I think about, and I'm working with some folks around. Project Drawdown is one of the most comprehensive research projects in recent history about how to reverse global climate change. Unfortunately, the green capitalists that commissioned this book just wanted to sell a book, but there's really credible peer-reviewed science in it, and a lot of the things that we could be doing here in New Hampshire and in northern New England that, right, the number one thing is the least sexy, right? Refrigerant management, right? Who wants to, what? Okay, anyway, what is that? You know, make sure that the people who take your refrigerator away are actually recycling the contents of the old school stuff is the worst greenhouse gas, but there's only a tiny amount of people in New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, wherever. We're only going to have so much of an impact on that. What we can really do is set examples for cooperative agriculture, right? And not just like, you sell my stuff, I'll sell yours, but like, can we have cooperative land tenure, right? Can we go back to reducing our costs of living and sharing those costs of living and pooling our efforts to be able to create food security while at the same time minimizing and mitigating our impact on the climate and its impact on us by reducing food waste. By educating girls, right? Think about it for a minute. Silvopasture, anyone know what that is? Right? It's moving cattle into the forests to graze, fertilize the forests. Is raising cattle good for the climate or bad? Good, bad? Bad. Good. There's conflicting science. There's, of course, massive, what's called centralized animal feed operations, where there's a whole bunch of cows standing on a piece of mud getting fed a bunch of corn, are one of the worst things that's going on besides the U.S. military and industrial complex for global climate. Or you can have very small herds of animals, cows or others, moving quickly over a landscape. They're building a ton of soil, and they are improving that soil's ability to hold and sink water. If we're going into a drought because of global climate change, we need to figure that out, right? We need to figure out how to get the roots of the plants that are growing on our soils longer and longer, and the depth of that biology to be deeper and deeper, so that when it rains, the rain doesn't do what just happened to us back in July. Was that in July? The huge flood? Yeah. Right? It sinks into the ground, and it's pooled in the water table for the times that we need it, instead of wrecking our communities. Regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of practices that we can be using to integrate animal and vegetable crops and create more diverse, stable systems. We also got to stop deforestation. Right now, the U.S. Forest Service has moved back up into northern New England, and they are convincing everybody that we should chop trees down because it's good for the economy and the environment. And they're lying, okay? Edge habitat is the title of the lie. You can find out a lot more of that. So regenerative agriculture, these are some of the ideas, right? Reduced food waste. There's a law in Vermont now that you can't throw away food waste, so here comes Casella, Waste Management Corporation, to basically destroy a good idea. What else do we got? So the idea of educating girls, it just turns out, exhaustive sociological studies, that educated girls turn into women who cooperate to manage their communities in sensible ways. Not just their families, it's not just about managing population growth and family planning, but it's about managing the way in which networks of communities tend and steward their lands and their economies and their cultures, right? So, handing the power over to young girls, right? Here's your silvopasture, we've got the cows in the woods, great. This is a statement that maybe we will all regard as being compelling in some way. So this is the basic idea. You guys are all here. Some of y'all are in college. A bunch of y'all are doing a bunch of different stuff. But trying to keep our landscapes in place, trying to hold the soil to the side of the hill, I think is your social justice mission. It's your ecological mission. And you're not going to be able to do it by yourself, right? And so in order to do it to scale, we want to figure out what our goals and strategy are, right? This is, if you're just waking up to this, is a 2-hour presentation crammed into a very short moment. But this is supposed to be the dumbest slide you'll see in a several month span, right? Current rate of success is not in the okay, bad, or bad column in a row. It's in the F. Right? And here is this minimum threshold of success, right? Now, while this is actually drawn from some statistical information, that's not important, right? We're all aware of this. This is what we're talking about, right? We have to get to the minimum threshold of success. In order to do that, we're going to have to figure out how to stop being me and start being we, right? And that's one of the things that our colleagues in La Via Campesina from all over the world tell us that is our biggest United States obstacle is y'all think you're individuals. And this individualism makes it impossible to organize or get anything done. So really trying to, sublimate the idea of what about me and really make sure that whatever crew you're rolling with, everybody is trying to create a fabric of connection and interdependence and moving something forward, because unless you're doing it at scale, like the populist movement did, like the civil rights movement did. Anybody ever heard of the Black Panthers 10-10-10 platform? Right? Every Black Panther would train 10 Black Panthers to train 10 Black Panthers to train 10 Black Panthers. So every Black Panther was 1,000 Black Panthers, right? One of the most famous Black Panthers was Fred Hampton, who founded the Rainbow Coalition. And his message to all of y'all is essentially, y'all are all Black Panthers if you want to be, right? That whole ideology, he took it and turned it into, the Rainbow Coalition, much like Martin Luther King, much like Malcolm X. Sorry to be this white boy up here in front of a room saying, hey, these guys are actually really racially inclusive, but the historical record supports the point, right? The idea is that we can't get it done alone. We've got to get it done multiculturally and internationally, right? So look at the populist movement, look at the civil rights movement. Effective mass movements offer the opportunity at every step for individuals to be invited into collective power and to be able to invite others into that collective power in time, right? We got this right here, the Great American Lawn, the most expensive crop in the country, right? Water runs off, creates ruin, takes all the fertility with it. The rest of this is what we're going for, right? Can we do this? Right? Yeah, yada yada, they're going to come cut down our trees, manage grazing might help. So here's some ideas that y'all can look at, and maybe we'll get an opportunity to talk some more about it during the question and answer in just a minute. But if we don't, I teach another workshop called the I Have a Dreamification of Martin Luther King and the Martin Luther Kingification of the Civil Rights Movement. This woman was the godmother of the Civil Rights Movement, Ella Baker, right? And so you'll be intrigued to know more about her if you don't yet. And that's it. There's just a bunch of ideas. This is where I'm coming from. And this is, despite Sasha's highest hopes, this is what I put together for you guys. So thanks so much.
I'm going to turn it over now to Skye Stephenson here. And let's see, make sure this is where we got. And the clicker.
Okay, and I just go like that, right?
Right or left? This one's a laser, so careful with the laser.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you today. I really appreciate all of you coming. Whatever your reasons, it's really great to have this gathering of people just trying to consider new ways or old new ways of revisioning, rethinking where we are in the world and with each other. So my name is Skye Stephenson, and I work at Keene State College. I'm in the Global Education Office. I've been here, I guess, about 13 or 15 years, and you're going to see that what I'm talking about today, I'm going to be focusing on Indigenous University and Indigenous movement in Ecuador, which is really interesting that Henry referred to Sumek Kouassi. We'll come back to that because it was out of Ecuador actually that this movement emerged, the whole idea. So, and they also talked about Buen Vivir as well. So it's really exciting to see it interconnecting. But to begin with, I want to say that the approach I'm going to take is a little bit different, because I also want to push our boundaries of, as we look into the future and we try to be hopeful, to consider our own inner landscapes, right? It doesn't always have to be concrete actions outside of us. That's really important. But a lot of it is also working within ourselves and kind of revisioning the way we think about possibilities of how society is. So to give a little bit of a background, for about 10 years or more, I was in a very peripheral way involved with intercultural university that emerged from the Indigenous movement of Ecuador. And when I was asked, and this is the man who for 10 years was a rector of the university, Luis Fernando Sorango. And when he asked me, I was down in Ecuador, I was at a different job at that time, and they had just begun to envision this university. We're sitting around, and as they presented the ideas, we were various Latin American educators. I've lived in Latin America a long time, and we were blown away by it. And he asked me if I could help out in the US. And I said, you have to understand that my step-great-grandfather started an Indian school, a boarding school. And he said, perfect. That's why you have to do this work. And as my journey has gone on, I also had the chance years later to go up to Regina University to present at the First Nations University up there. And they had a ceremony, like a healing ceremony with one of their Native American shamans. And we went around a room, and some were Indigenous of different groups, and a lot of us were from all different places around the world. And I shared the same thing. And they said, perfect, you're part of the healing. So I think, especially the US more than other places, and especially in recent days and years, we've become very kind of polarized around identity and who we are. And the truth is, we all have our own healing paths that need to be taken, and we can't necessarily do them alone. And that's also part of this, and that's also in a way connected with decolonization and rethinking things in new ways. So that's a long story, but I wanted to give that background. And if you were in an Indigenous community or setting in Latin America, they would always start off explaining who they were, what their background is. They wouldn't just start talking, because you need to know where they come from. So, we all come from mixed stories and backgrounds, and that's part of our human family that we're working towards. I'm wearing this scarf with a rainbow because that's actually, for a long time, it's been the symbol of the Indigenous movement of the Andes. The first time I ever saw it, way before I ever saw it in the US, was when I was down in Ecuador and Peru. And they have their flags with the rainbow and stuff. So it's funny because I have a rainbow hat I wear a lot, and people a lot of times will stop me, and I'm totally in solidarity with the way it's been used in recent years in the US. But, they'll be like, thanks for being in solidarity. I'm like, you don't really know that I'm wearing this because I think of the Indigenous movement of Latin America as well. So, the rainbow's universal. Everybody has its own meaning, but I was given this by them. So. Okay, so this is a picture. In fact, you can see the rainbow flag. This is actually from Peru. And they're doing a honoring to Pachamama. Does anybody know what Pachamama is? Have they heard the word before? Yeah. Anybody? So it's basically the major language, which was actually a colonial language a long time ago, is Quechua in the Andes, and it means, some people I've seen it today actually translated as nature, but it's not an ambivalent nature. It's usually a nature that's viewed as female, like the life-giving earth, that's always viewed as kind of the female energy, not in a gendered. So that's offering to Pachamama, to the earth. So this is a picture of a ceremony that I attended up in the high mountains. I don't know, you can see me and my friends. I think Terry, my husband, took the photo, Peggy, and that's me. They didn't quite know what to do with us at that ceremony, but as they revision their education, that I'll talk a little bit more about, one of the most important things, and it was from the very beginning of any event any of us ever attended, they'll begin with an offering to the earth. And this ceremony actually lasted quite a long time. It was about 45 minutes, and it was a graduation ceremony for a university. But they started with an offering to the earth. So really, in order to be able to at all address or speak about the kind of work and the ideas that grew up in the Andes and that are spreading around the world, you have to be based in the sacred and the sacred of nature. If not, nothing else exists. And I'll be honest, it's hard for me to even talk about that in these institutions because I don't feel like it's a very safe place in general in the US to talk about the sacred in nature and mix it in with environment or politics or anything else because it sort of freaks people out. But you can't do anything if you don't do that within that worldview. Yeah. Actually, it was interesting, my friend Peggy, who's like a very atheist kind of person, they told me that later. It went on and on. It was a really long ceremony. And Peggy sat down to me and she said, my dad's been dead for 10 years and I swear he was right next to me. And I said he probably was. And then I later asked them, they said, yeah, that was a ceremony to call in the ancestors. So anyway, does anybody recognize, look at Dottie. So this university isn't just someplace way out there. It's also had a connection with King State College. So this is Dottie and me. We did an honors trip with these lovely students. Remember, Dottie?
I remember that picture.
You're right on the Ecuador, on the equator right there. That's like mitad del mundo, halfway, like, you know, right at that point. Yeah, so there was Dottie and me. We did that in 2013. And 2 years earlier, actually, Sarango had come here in 2011 and been part of a symposium that was co-sponsored by Geo and the Geography Department, where we talked about the Indigenous University. So this is a little bit of an overview about the Indigenous University. I'm going to go back more, but what I wanted to show you is this house right here, which Dottie, you'll remember, and my husband Terry also has been there. We actually helped raise money to construct this house. It was part of their campus, and it's actually an Amazonian design, but it's they built it up in the Andes Mountains near Quito. But what we did is it's called a minga. Has anybody heard about a minga? And it connects with what Henry was saying. In traditional Andean society, everybody gets together to do projects sometimes. It's called a minga. The community comes together. Nobody pays. It's just you do it because you got to do it. So this was like a minga project. So when we went down, we were like, yeah, we'll raise money to help out with the minga for this. And then it was built and they used it. So this is the mission of the university. And I'll come back to this a little bit more. I don't want to spend all the time on talking about the background, but basically, this university, well, let's just place Ecuador. In 2008, Ecuador established a very, new kind of constitution. And it came out of the United Indigenous movement that had been protesting for about 10 to 15 years. And in that constitution, they called themselves a plurinational state, which is exactly the opposite of the US. The US were out of many one. We expect no matter who you are to come in and be the same. They said, no, we're a plurinational state. We have multiple nationalities. In addition, they embodied in that, it was the first time ever in world history, the rights of nature. They said that it's not just human rights, but that Ecuador has the responsibility and all people in it to support nature. And that nature is a living being, rivers, mountains, streams, etc. And that they also said that the role of society was not development, it was good living, sumit kawasi. So this is where these all came for the first time at the national level. They've been thrown out around before, but that's when it came out. And as part of this whole movement, for a while, they had been saying we need to have a new university that is with this mindset. Because this current university, the one we're sitting, I love it, I spent all my life in university. We're part of the old model. We're part of the Western paradigm of everybody's here to, get a job, make money, etc. So they said we have to think of something different. So this is the different Ecuadorian groups. And this was the original Kanai movement that started, you can see all the way from 1986 till 2008 to get it in the Constitution. And they protested, you know, they fought for a long time. It wasn't just like fun and games for them to get, but they did. And it emerged from like kind of an Andean worldview, Indigenous Andean worldview. We'll get back to the Declaration of Independence. But this is what I said we were talking about. All of us have talked about the same thing. So just think, how would you change your life? How would it be different if instead of thinking about development, like I'll get a house, I'll get a car, I'll do this, I'll do this, what's good living? Every once in a while I remind myself, like, what's good living? Like, you know, what is good living for me? You know, for us, for our community. And it is a different mindset. But I wanted to get to this. So they sat down and they said, you know, what is the current university? And to be honest, originally they looked at the U.S. tribal colleges, which have been functioning for quite a while. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there's several. And then they rejected it because they said it's the same old paradigm. It's just, you know, with an indigenous language. So just to highlight a few things, they say, what do we think in the university nowadays? You know, the more time you spend in the university, the more value you have in the market. Always unsatisfied consumption, hierarchy, submission, passivity. You want to be a super specialist, like if you're a PhD, you're like a super specialist in something. Think in a fragmented way, and you believe being is happening. This might be exaggeration, but this is kind of like, again, you know, the university is part of our mainstream society. Then they said, what do we want to learn? We want to learn cooperatively, learn to relearn, be part of the thinking, living concept, and be oriented to wisdom and good living, and a respect for diversity. So I'm going to go through this pretty fast, but they had, they decided to base their university on the Chicana, which is a symbol of the Indigenous in South America. It's a very, very profound symbol that has lots of levels of meaning. But they brought it in with the different elements of air, water, fire, and earth, and the challenges, and then also focus a lot on community. I'm going through this fast, but what happened is that for about 10 years, the university was functioning, and that's when Dottie and I went down. And we brought a group of students when Rector Sarango came. And this is where we need to get to hope, because this is the main theme. How do you have hope when you've done all this work, and then the Ecuadorian government changes and says that your university shouldn't exist anymore, that it isn't a valid university, and takes away your accreditation, which is what happened. And so went on, there was quite a struggle for several years. And what strategies do we have when everything we've been working for years gets shut down? Like, what do you do? So I was thinking about this presentation recently, and I don't know who said this quote. They say maybe Einstein said it, but I'm not quite sure this is true that he said it. But he said you can't solve a problem at the same level that it was created. Was that Einstein who said it? Okay, I wasn't sure. Sometimes. Okay. So anyway, that's what they ended up doing because, oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Because what they said is, okay, if you don't like how we're run, you say our accreditation doesn't work. And the reasons that they stopped it was because not everyone had a PhD. They used elders who might have been ancestors. They did a lot with ancestral knowledge, but if you went out and asked a toothless older man how to grow seeds, they knew, but it didn't sound very agrarian-ish and whatever. So they said they weren't using competent people, they didn't have big universities, they placed it in communities, etc. So they got together and they said, okay, we won't be a university anymore. We'll be a pluriversity. We'll change our name. And we'll get together and create our own accreditation based on different values. Because if you don't like our values and our system, we'll make our own. And that's a good strategy. That's what Henry's talking about. You know, that you have to, like, again, like maybe recreate something new. So anyway, you see a group of them there, and they call themselves Network of Indigenous Intercultural Universities of Avayala. Does anybody know, has anybody ever heard the term Avayala? That's what the indigenous people, some of them, at least in Latin America, are beginning to call the America. Because America was named for a guy who never even stepped foot here in the Americas, right? And so Avayala is actually a Kuna name. So there.
Kuna Yala from Panama?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kuna Indian. Yeah, it means land and also blood. But they chose the Kuna because it's right in the middle between north and south. So that's why they chose the Kuna name. Yeah. So those are the members. And, you know, they set out their own objectives, which were quite different. And, you know, how we are educated, how we think does have an impact. Guiding values, empathy with Mother Earth, spirituality, understanding diversity, growing wisdom and knowledge, not so much investigating. But what I wanted to kind of wrap up with is to say that when a new idea sparks, whatever it is, it can take off and change and evolve over time. And sometimes you don't know what it is. And usually the original spark isn't exactly how it ends up. But, you know, from some of the struggles and challenges that have been going on for several decades, and from the fervor of trying and suggesting new ways of envisioning things, such things as the rights of nature is beginning to enter the mainstream. And it was because of Ecuador, the very first country to ever do that, even before Bolivia. The rights of nature, Ecuador was the first country where they brought a lawsuit on behalf of the river in 2011 that won, because they said that they pushed dirt into the river and blocked it, and its flow was wrong. And since then, other countries are adopting this as well. So it's really, you know, these seed thoughts or ideas, you know, we've heard them alluded to by the other people as well. You know, we're at a new and challenging time, and so we have some interesting new tools, but it's a struggle, and people are going to try to shut it down, and then they need to be rethought and reconfigured, and you never quite know when you light a spark exactly where it's going to go. But, you know, I think there's a lot of hopefulness in the idea that a very small country on the equator kind of struggled and tried to come up with some really different ways of seeing things that are taking hold other places as well. And also, I think it behooves all of us to just ask ourselves, you know, what's good living for us, for each of us and for our societies. And I want to also really reiterate the last thing. What Henry talked about is, it's true, the US is the most cross-culturally, on all definitions, it's the most self-centered, like I country in the whole world, the most individualistic on all parameters, even though we make I like capital, but you, we, and stuff is small letters. And so, you know, none of us can do this alone, you know, and in collaboration. So moving from I to we is really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I'm just going to say a couple of things here and then lead us into hopefully some discussion and some questions for everybody. And let me just pull this up. The good news is most of the people in this room have heard me talk before, right? And know my stuff. So I'm going to keep my stuff very short here. Matter of fact, those of you who are in my class, we were talking about Sweden agriculture, and we were talking about feedlots and all that stuff like a few hours ago. It's like you've never left the room. So what I just want to say here before we lead into some discussion is really just a couple things. Which is, just how bad can things be and still be manageable, right? Because I think trying to get back, a lot of the things that we've talked about today is really that theme of hope, right? And that's one thing we've kind of tried to structure this, and looking at what people have been doing, for a long, long time in Malaysia, what people have been doing in Ecuador, what people have been doing in Vermont, right? There are these mass movements going on around the world. And, those of you who in the room who know me know I like to go to places where, I try to find as bad stuff as possible. So I do most of my research in places that are either like on atolls where sea level rise is starting to cover them over, or I go to places that are nuclear weapons testing grounds where people have been forcibly removed from their islands and had nuclear bombs dropped on them, right? And one of the things through the research that I've done in some of these places, also like Fukushima, and like how do you live in an area that's got way more radiation than you should ever live in? And one of the things about that research is that as bad as things get, sorry, let me get here because I'm purposely skipping over many slides. As bad as things get, because some of the places, like I said, have had these nuclear testing things, they've had their islands literally vaporized, populations have been exposed to massive amounts of radiation, all this sort of thing. But one of the things that's actually sort of amazing is when you go to these places and you talk to these people is life does go on. And people do persevere. And people do find ways to come up with solutions as communities, right? There are places that have suffered all this nuclear contamination, like Fukushima, like the Marshall Islands, and people are still there, right? And they're still making lives in these places. It's not easy, and there's still these complications. And also with newer things like sea level rise, when you're on an atoll that has, very little elevation, and the sea level goes up even, 10 centimeters, you've got problems, right? But they are not just giving up and saying, well, I guess that's it, we're leaving and we're going to go to the mainland or whatever. They're like, no, well, maybe we're going to build up one of the islands while we're on another one and then move things over and then try different engineering things. And then maybe we'll have to leave, and if we do, then we'll also find some way to survive. And I think one of the things that has been a theme as I've looked at some of these examples is that it occurs to me that, there are always going to be crises. There have been crises. We are living crises now. And there will be more tomorrow. Some that we don't even know are coming. But I always again, those of you who have had classes with me know I harp on this a lot. What if we're in the middle of things, right? Maybe this isn't the apocalypse, right? As much as it may appear to be in different ways, right? And so our environments are always going to fluctuate. Our societies are always going to fluctuate. But we need to kind of govern ourselves and our environments as if we're always going to be in the middle of dynamic processes, right? We ought to expect that. Like, for instance, with sea level, we know that it's doing this, right? But guess what was never an option? That was never going to happen over long time scales, right? It's always going to do some sort of fluctuation, and we're always going to have to deal with that sort of thing. And of course, with social changes too. There's going to be economic booms, there's going to be economic busts. How do we create something different that kind of gets us out of those cycles? And one of my favorite theorists is Donna Haraway. She has this saying called staying with the trouble, which is maybe you can't solve all your problems, but you can stay with the trouble. In other words, we may not be able to solve things once and for all, but we can manage things pretty well and keep working towards improvement, right? But I think one of the key points about this is that we have to have a vision in our head for what that improvement's going to be, right? We have to think about sustainability. We have to think about the ethics of inclusion and things that we do. And I think that, going back to the slide that I had earlier, right, that we can do more than merely sort of survive our current environmental and social crises. We can reactivate and learn about these different techniques, like a lot of the stuff that everybody talked about in terms of what Skye was talking about, in terms of, hey, there's different ways to do education. The Samai show us that there are different ways you can live that have been going on for millennia. And what Henry's been talking about is there's ways to create mass movements and ways to try and then implement different ways of doing agriculture and addressing climate change from the roots, right? But it takes work and intention, right? Action motivated with the intention of actually running things differently. Because if you don't do that, I think we've talked about this idea of hope. I think Karen brought this up. Kind of hope without some sort of action behind it is, escapism, right? To be, maybe I'll just get better. It's probably not really the solution, right? It's hope with intention and action. And I think, Henry hit it on the head too. If you don't have a mass movement to try and deliver this stuff together as a we, you don't have a very good chance of success. And so one of the big keys, I think, is creating that kind of mass movement, that kind of way we think about things together. And so what I'd like to do at this stage is, wrap up the talking from here to there, and kind of open it up a bit to kind of questions people have, or for any of the people that talked and presented, and also some of your own ideas and thoughts on this. And let's kind of open it up to that. If that sounds like a good idea at this point. Sound like a plan? All right, I'm going to turn that off so that doesn't blind everybody who walks by. So I just want to open it up in terms of who might have a question, and I don't know, Henry, if you want to kind of come up and, or if we all want to
All right,
put the chairs up here.
facilitate a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, more bad news, everybody.
Oh, sorry, I hit you.
Y'all, the three of y'all can come sit. So yeah, dish out. What are y'all thinking? Anything like, hey, no, that was bullshit, or this? Can we get a little bit more of this? What are y'all thinking about? Right, go ahead.
What was your name?
Me?
Yeah.
Skye.
Skye. I really liked what you were saying about how a lot of universities in America today aren't generally the most safest areas to talk about spirituality and more nature-connected lifestyles. And I agree with you. They're not. You start kind of bringing stuff up around here, and people look at you like you're a nut a little bit. And something that I bring up to people a lot that I don't think a lot of people are aware of is that there's some places in the area around here, specifically right down 101, there's a small farm called Plowshare, and it's connected to a bigger chain of schools that are connected to, they're called like High Mowing, and they teach a very holistic lifestyle, and they do kind of like a life sharing thing. And I don't know, it's just something that I've been able to get involved with that's given me a way to kind of apply what I'm learning here to, I don't know, it's something that I want to connect more people to, and it's something that after I'm done here at Keene State, I hope I can get more involved with. But I just really liked your point on that, and I liked how kind of the three of you had similar things talking about, like how you talked about the Sinai people and how they have a very living in the present lifestyle where they're not so much worried about what they as an individual are going to have in the future, but they worry about what they have that day, and if they have more than what they need, they give to the people around them. And I agreed with what you said, Henry, about how people here at universities like this and in America in general are very individual, and that sucks.
It's too bad, huh?
Yeah.
It's too bad. Yeah, I mean, us kind of intersecting on that in Spanish, they talk about casualidad and causalidad, casuality or causality, right? Be like an accident. This was an accident, but it's because we're all looking at the same thing, so it's not really an accident, right? What else? Who else would like to? Thank you.
I grew up in an area I grew up in the Mount Washington Valley. I don't know if anybody knows where Mount Washington is. It's a great area. And there's a lot of schools up there that are more holistic. Like my town has always had like since the 80s, we've had like a town like compost, and like we're very big on like reducing waste, like recycling, and just trying to like do what we can as a community. And that's kind of like valley wide. And so I never really like noticed that that was weird or anything. But when I came here, people like thought it was kind of weird. But they're like, oh, ew. Like when people talk about like composting, that like is not necessarily the prettiest thing. But I didn't really realize that was like something people like looked at weird until I like left that area, because it's just always something we did. Like in our elementary school, we had a compost at the school that then they would like move, and we were connected to like we would take field trips to like the local farm, and like we worked in relation to the farm, and that was like a public school, so that wasn't even that weird for me. And I just think it's really interesting that like that's kind of like a taboo like way of teaching students, is like going directly to like small like locally owned farms and things, and like learning what you can do, and like ways to like implement change in your life. Like they would send home like trees, and we would have to plant them,
Yeah, these are both such wonderful comments and you know, just appreciate it. I just want to, I'm a story person, so we had one time an Indigenous university student, because we have a partner university in Ecuador, come with us, and we were driving her around the first day, and she said, where I brought my stuff, where are the ceremonies? And we're like, there's no ceremonies here. And she couldn't believe it, because there's different ways, there's so many different ways of approaching things. I don't mean to put Dottie on the spot, but when we did the group, we did like, it wasn't so environmental, but we like also like tried to connect with the energies of water, fire, earth, air, and like those kind of rituals and ceremonies that are other kind of complementary parts as well that are just, I'm just throwing that out as other like mosaics in this mosaic of creating like our living world around us. So thank you so much.
I just wanted to throw out that I'm affiliated with an organization called the Regeneration Corps. We're in a bunch of high schools teaching ag, race, and climate, and we've just conceived of the Super Compost Project, where it's illegal to throw away food waste in Vermont anymore, so we're teaching schools how to compost their food waste, so they're not buying finished soils to grow their school gardens with. There's a ton of science, math, English being taught on the back of compost in 22 schools and growing with the Super Compost Project, so check that out. I saw a hand up here, and then go ahead. Did you have something to say?
You mentioned multiple times about building like a mass movement and building like communities or community building, and you mentioned that you've been a part of the anti-globalization movement. But in my experience with like a lot of activist spaces and any kind of community-oriented projects, is that for the average person, it's to some degree inaccessible. Usually, whether it has to do with understanding like who to talk to, like where to actually like sign up. I was wondering like how can people here actually interface with the movement itself, whether it be one organization or many.
Well, we are in a low ebb. I want to say this to my fellow people who happen to be standing on United States soil. We are in a low ebb right now, but it doesn't mean there aren't a lot of options. When I was a kid, I went to where it was happening, thinking I was just some hack kid and maybe I could like go grocery shopping for everybody or whatever. Next thing you knew, my 19-year-old butt was like training all the law school kids on how to take legal videography and organizing. Just there's so much work to be done, and going to where the movement says it's being that week, whether it's Standing Rock or up in Penobscot country in Maine, going there and meeting people under the banner of that social movement, of that ideology, of that loved thing, and making those relationships, that's where it all starts. So you just got to get there. When you're getting called to a migrant justice event or to, I don't know anybody there, I don't really feel like it, blah, blah, blah. Get your body to that spot and talk to some people, Because, that's the options at this point, right? There's other great organizations that are easy to find, and you can go and you can volunteer, and it's important to get your chops working with people, doing any little, stuff in letters, or sending books to prisoners, or hopefully you don't find yourself in the New Hampshire State House that often, but other things, I see these two gentlemen, one, two.
All right. First of all, I've been coming on to Keene State campus since I retired 13 years ago and seen a lot of presentations. Bugged the heck out of Dottie. But anyhow, this has been the most thought-provoking presentation I have attended in the last 13 years. So I have a very simple question, is how do we somehow connect with you folks or your resources or whatever it might be, because you've just opened the door a crack in terms of things, and it'll all go in one ear and out the other if we don't have some way to connect.
Yeah, this is gonna work.
You have to put a little spin on it. You literally have to spin
Contact me at
on it. Oh my God, that's so bad. I don't know why we put those things in. It's embarrassing.
Thank you.
Actually, my comment follows directly on yours. I teach a class here called environmental advocacy that some folks have taken. Power to the people. Unfortunately, it's full next semester. But if you can't get into class, I love having conversations about this kind of thing, and the class will be a center of that. So maybe there's some ways that we can work to have some more conversations like this. I agree, this was a wonderful panel. I want to also comment about a class I'm teaching now, which is called Principles of Sustainability. I really worked to get my students here today. But in today's class, we were discussing how do you get from an extractive linear economy to a regenerative circular economy. And one of the ideas that we were just beginning to toss around is that it really is a question of values. How do we get back to the values that are in favor of community, sense of place, people having power in their communities? And that a lot of those ideas were embodied in Indigenous cultures, but we've lost them. And so we can learn from different cultures how to get back to those values, and that those values will help us make the transition. So this has just been, like my head's been buzzing. But I also want to just briefly comment on, Karen, I think it was your notion about hope. You said that, I wrote this down, I love this. Hope is not wishful thinking, it's locating the glimmers of possibility in the present. And I just love that, because I think each of you has been talking about glimmers of possibility in the present, and maybe we could even, if anybody wants to say anything more about that. Love that.
I think kind of hopefully speaks to both of these things, and also echoes what Henry was saying too about, like, you go and you meet the people. I think that's one of the key things too when we think about, like, if we open the door crack about, like, okay, so now what? Like, how do we actually then kind of connect more and all this? I think that is the thing. Is, like, I would say that it's not just finding one organization, because there's a lot of organizations doing a lot of work, and some of the people are in multiple organizations, but you start making a connection, and then another connection, and another connection, and I think you're absolutely right. You go and you put yourself in the spaces where these things are happening, and you start meeting the people that are doing the things and the kind of work you want to do, right? Like, so for me, growing up, I used to go to the Nevada nuclear weapons test site, because that was back when the U.S. was still blowing up nuclear bombs in Nevada, right? And so I was with people that were like, this seems like a bad idea. And I'm like, yeah, I'm with you on this. Like, hey, let's go blockade a road. Okay. And then you start meeting these other people who then are like, well, then they're involved with Greenpeace or this organization or whatever, and you start kind of branching out and finding your, people that are in that network. But you have to think about that literally, like, kind of people always probably tell you when you're looking for a job to network, right? Meet this person, that person. Same thing in social movements, right? You meet people, you go to different places, but there's one thing I would add too to what Fred said about another key component here about hope, and a lot of it is about values and all that, and I talked about that too, we all did. We also need land, right? And by that, land. I mean, a place on the earth to make ideas real. Because that's one of the things that the Samai have. That's one of the things the Ecuadorian, the people doing the Indigenous universities have. Right, to be able to put regenerative agriculture into play. Like, I'm familiar with a lot of the Hawaiian examples, and it's like you reinstitute the Ahapua system, which is the way they used to set up their land, and you got to make it real, right? And so I think that's another key thing is we got to start thinking about how do we, and I know me and Henry have talked about this, like that kind of archipelago, right? The little groups of islands of spaces where you can make the values happen. And then if you do that, you attract the people too, because it becomes more real.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I'll say that we just started co-op land trust. We're a legal entity and a 501c3. There's a right to own land, and the way that land is to be used is that collectives of mostly young people will stand up and say, we are the people who are going to steward this land. And another collective is going to say, we're the people that's going to steward this land over here. But the voting and decision-making about how both of those or all 1,000 parcels of land will be used, all of the members that live in all of the spots will all vote and treat it as one commons, right? So this is going to be like the craziest shit show reality TV show you've ever seen. But please get in touch with me if that's because I'd like to help talk about what collectivism looks like and cooperativism and land stewardship. Right?
So Henry, so do the young people, like some of them, they want to get involved, do they have to put some money down, or how do they get involved?
Lots of money up front. No, I mean, we're going to work it out. We're going to make the road by walking, to use one of the Indigenous, the Mesoamerican Indigenous principles of unity and resistance. The folks who get in early, I think, are going to, that sounds like such schluck, but yeah. The folks who started out are going to have an easier time figuring out, being members, than once we figure out where all the hard spots are and people vote and say, oh, you're going to have to buy in or you can work in or blah, blah. But it's called the Co-op Land Trust. You can get in touch with me. And then I also just wanted to say for you teachers in the room, Just Transition is starting to shape up as a really cogent and coherent philosophy that's addressing a lot of this stuff, especially the content coming out of Movement Generation. Take a look.
And I want to get some land. I would love to have a spot. I mean, people in my seminar know. I would like one of their seminar projects for capstone was like, can we get some land and can we start a community farm or garden? And we didn't get there all the way this year, but we're gonna keep pushing it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
give
that's
us
what I
Sasha.
want.
Yes, yes. Come on, more stuff. Throw things. Yes, sorry.
Hi, so I'm a education major right now, majoring in elementary education. And I was just curious to know, like, what would you find that we teachers coming should want to look for educating our youth on the subjects you also talked about today?
You know about the Upper Valley Educators Institute? It's up in Lebanon, not too terribly far, and they are turning out teachers and principals. We come and instruct our racial justice and education partners from Building Fairer Futures come and instruct teachers and principals on a lot of subjects, but with a lot of justice feathered into that, sort of like how to teach those elements. I also got to turn you on to the Education Justice Coalition. If you haven't seen their stuff, they're really about racial equity in schools, and there's a lot of great content there.
I don't know, I mean, every context is so different. So two kind of random things just come to my mind at a very personal level. One is, I remember years ago, I went on a small island out of the coast of Salvador in Brazil, which had been a former runaway slave area, quilombos, and it was a very poor primary school. We went inside, and every single classroom had the Declaration of Human Rights on the wall, and they were talking about that. And I didn't have a chance to mention it, but the U.S. was the last country to approve the UN Declaration of Indigenous People. It was brought forward about 10 years ago, and 4 countries voted against it: the U.S., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And finally, the U.S. was the very last one to sort of approve it, and they just said that it wouldn't be legally binding. So this sounds kind of silly, but I just thought, why is it that like in the poorest of schools on a little island off the coast of Brazil, every single kid by the time they're in 2nd grade know the Declaration of Human Rights, and I've never seen it in many classrooms in the U.S. So I mean, I do think that there are like certain ways of learning or knowing that can be helpful. Kind of more I tend to take the more global perspective, but yeah. maybe even, well, I think Waldorf schools and others do a really good job. I don't know how much regular schools can do that. I know that a charter school at Waldorf here is doing that, but you know, bringing in nature. Finland, because, sorry, Karen lives in Finland, is got #1 education in the world. I understand that elementary level is all out in nature.
Yes.
Go visit.
Yeah.
You're getting taught an industrial education model.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
because whoever's teaching it to you has to teach you that.
Mhm.
And just
For
like any other
accreditation.
trade, if you want to learn other techniques, you need to go learn from the masters, you know?
Yeah.
So get to the school in the
Go to Finland, that's #1 in the
Go
world.
to Finland, yeah. Go to the Zapatista autonomous zones in Chiapas and learn about educations
Right.
in other modes. I see a hand raised back there. Oh, that's your hair. Huh? Can you say anything in front of the room? Come on, let's hear it. Yes, please.
I really, I forget what it's called. I like your idea of the transition. Because we live in a world of consumerism, which has led us to need abundance. Our abundance is killing the environment. Our abundance of food, our abundance of clothing. We have to expand to keep up with this. So it's kind of a topic of moderation. We need to find a point of, I think we were talking about there, values. And so we need to moderate our values and moderate our wants and needs. It's kind of like we learn that as kids, but we kind of forget what are needs. And so I kind of like this theory of people of eat what you need. Don't overdo it so you don't have scraps. Eat exactly what you need and then you'll be fine. You know. So that's kind of all I have to say. I think the idea of moderation is what's going to help us in the future.
Are you guys talking about like bringing this whole values idea? We went through that slide really fast. You see these big mandalas of concepts. And the bottom of it was the values filter, right? And it was all about having values as the evaluative tool of everything that you're doing. But absolutely, that's not just what you eat or what you wear, or what you drive, but it's what everybody in your community has access to. And when you find that it's a we that is using resources and producing resources together, that things feel a lot more sufficient than when you feel like you're all by yourself or just your family. Professor.
One of my favorite quotes by Bill McKibben, the climate activist, is that we consume in this culture because we are spiritually unfulfilled. And so he says if we can look within, as all of you are saying, to find that spiritual connection, sense of meaning and value, we won't feel like we need so much stuff, and that will help to solve climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, etc. So again, the values and the spirit come in, but that's just, that value perspective that you're talking about is so important.
Saw it here first, folks. Bill McKibben makes a salient point. That's amazing.
So I don't mean to put my husband on the spot, but he's involved in community energy. So not to talk very much, but sometimes we think we aren't doing that much, but there are little things that are happening even in our little place that we can be so critical of. So I don't know, in 1 minute or two, but how many in the county know how many communities have signed on to community power in the last year or about to?
We have 9.
Yeah.
9 have joined Cheshire County itself, and then there are 3 other towns who've gone on their own for community power, and that takes control of electricity, of what type of electricity that you use and how much of it that you use, and especially how much you pay for it. It decentralizes so that we're bringing the production of electricity closer to the load of where we're actually using it. And we're doing that on a local level. It took a lot of kicking and screaming, but it's finally happening, and I don't think that they can take it away from us now if we keep going.
So there are little victories. Hope, this is what hope is. It's not like the gigantic stuff, but it's like also acknowledging those little glimmers that are happening.
We're recruiting for, here in the state of New Hampshire, if you make a student uncomfortable, if a parent thinks he made a student uncomfortable about racial issues, that teacher could lose their license, right? Now, the Supreme Court is not maybe what we would hope it might be, but we want someone at the end of their career to pick that fight. So if you know of any teachers that are considering retirement soon and want to get fired for teaching kids that they are strong no matter what color or creed they are, give them that email. And with the National Lawyers Guild, it's going to be fine.
Well, I think one thing I'd like to do, because I know, first of all, thank you to everybody who's come this evening and stuff. And I also want to be mindful of time and one thing. But also, I know some people may, be not necessarily comfortable about asking a question in a big group or whatever. So if it's okay with you all, I was thinking we can kind of, give our thanks and say our official goodbyes. But then anybody who wants to come up and just kind of talk to us one-on-one here and just kind of float up and have some more informal conversations, we can kind of open it up to that. Because I know some of y'all, I've been with you since like 9 a.m. And so, yeah. And so I know some folks have got to go and stuff. But first, so if anyone does want to come up and just have some individual conversations, I think that's great.